And I think we're live, guys.
Here to be live.
Awesome. Well, welcome to Fearless Flight Live, our weekly show for you if you happen to be a fearful flyer or if you just love aviation and like to talk shop with usually Captain Ron, who we'll get to where he is. And then Captain Eric, and also our lovely flight attendant, Diane, who just came back from recurrent training and, of course, passed with flying colors. Congratulations, Diane. And yeah, so tonight, if you are new to our weekly show, tonight we're gonna also have a guest on a little later in the show, Don Calvert, really great guy, and I'm gonna say someone who really has had quite a journey, but the most important part of that journey is the perseverance and cultivating that belief that it's possible to change that experience of, well, I hate flying, I don't want to fly, this is going to be my last flight, into a much more, I'm going to say, palatable experience. So we're going to hear from Don. He just actually completed a trip to the Dominican. But first of all, if you're not a part of our Fearless Flight Birds of a Feather Facebook group, which is our community online, then I strongly encourage you to become a member. We're over, gosh, we're almost 1,300, I think, people in there. And it's a great, safe, nurturing place where you can ask questions, get support, and also get lots of tips from maybe those who already are fearless flyers and love to pay it forward and give back. So, but tonight we're going to start with questions that I've seen on the Facebook group about actually two incidents. And let's start with the Hawaiian incident. Diane, why don't you get us started? What actually happened? Because I was busy flying to Mexico, where I am right now, so I didn't actually hear about what was going on.
Well, it hit the news big time on Sunday. Hawaiian Airlines Flight 35, I believe, from Phoenix to Honolulu they were about 30 minutes out from landing and encountered severe turbulence. And there were upwards of about 36 injuries, and 11, I think it was 11 people were brought to the hospital after they landed in Honolulu. And there you can see on Facebook, or you go on to Google and Google the incident, that there were paramedics, of course, on the aircraft when it landed. And there were at least 3 that I'm aware of the flight attendants were injured among the injured. There you can see online several pictures of the debris in the aisle. There were some panels, overhead panels, which were damaged. Not necessarily from anybody's head, but from objects, heavy objects, which flew up into the overhead area. So that was a big deal because, well, for anybody, but there certainly has not been anything like that that I'm aware of for some time. And it really interested me. I lived in Honolulu for about 12 and a half years. And even when I moved back to the mainland, flew back and forth from Arizona to Hawaii many times and never encountered anything of that nature. So that was the absolute definition of unexpected turbulence. So, and now Eric can address the weather involvement there and what that aspect was.
Yeah, Eric, how can something like that happen when it's so unexpected? Usually,
what they were doing is that they were 30 minutes out of Honolulu, and this airplane was an A330, a great big thing, and you can vary the seating capacity depending on how you have it delivered. Generally, it's around 250 people, so it holds a lot of passengers. and they were just getting ready to start down, and there was weather, thunderstorms in the area, and they were weaving around them. And if they didn't get caught with a thunderstorm top, I don't know if they were clear or using the radar, but at any rate, they turned into an area of probably what was an extreme downdraft coming off the side of the thunderstorm, giving them that brutal hit. And we can tell you how to avoid that, and then Diane will talk to you about that in a minute. But they did take quite a beating, and there were some pictures, particularly one dramatic one of what we call the PSU, the passenger service unit overhead, with the lights, the vents, and the oxygen mask. And from the commentary, for what we could piece together, it might have been a gentleman's hydro flask that launched out of his lap and hit the PSU, because it had quite a smash in it in the picture. When we first saw it, we thought, oh man, that was somebody's head, but I think it was a hydro flask. Nevertheless, people did hit the roof, get pitched. There were injuries, but out of this flight, there were 30 they thought were injured or hurt at all, 11 to the hospital. So there were hundreds that got off the airplane and went on their vacation. And the reason they got off the airplane and went on their vacation was because they had their seat belts on, like they should have had, and they didn't go flying around the airplane cabin landing on people. And the other thing is, the other takeaway here is the airplane did not plummet, didn't tip over, didn't tear it apart. And it for sure went to the hangar, the doctor's office, and the mechanics. The doctors had a real close look at it. And we know you guys with the great big brains are going, but what if they miss something? Well, all these airplanes now are really, really smart, and they tell the doctor, the mechanics, they're transmitting all the time to the company and the manufacturer about stresses in the airframe all over the place. And they highly likely had a printout before they landed. If anything got overstressed, broken, that kind of thing, they probably knew before they brought it in there. And there may have been issues like radios or things in a battery rack or that kind of thing that can tend to get damaged and roll bumps. But structurally, the airplane was just fine. And not only that, we're laughing about Ron not being here, because we always go, why doesn't the news ever give us anything? So he's gone on vacation, and now it's given us this, and it's given it to you guys too. And the same day, there was a United flight off of Rio. Did we say Rio, Dan?
Yes,
going to Houston.
Yeah.
777, and they same thing. They hit some bumps, and 5 people got hurt. Well, you're saying, oh man, how can you avoid this? Well, we take every precaution we can. It occurs occasionally. There's 100,000 departures per day in airplanes, and here's 2 of them. And we haven't even heard about anything like this in months or longer. So the odds of this, holding your breath like your 2-year-old waiting for this to happen to you, is going to make you turn really, really blue.
And both of these, and I don't know that much about the United incident with regard to their passengers, but with regard to the Hawaiian Airlines turbulence, in reading some of the reports from some of the passengers that were on that aircraft, they were talking about, a couple of them were, well, I was buckled in, but I still, kind of flew out of my seat and was holding on to the seat back and in front of me and that sort of thing. And it kind of dovetailed in with one of the questions, Dieter, that you had for me to investigate in, and that is why do we have to keep our seatbelts on all the time? Maybe even when the seatbelt sign is off, that sort of thing. And the reason why we do that is the definition of unexpected turbulence. If we expected it, then we could tell you when to have your seatbelt on or off or whatever. But we don't know. And crew members, when we deadhead or when we're flying for leisure travel or anything like that, we have our seatbelts on all the time. I mean, unless you have to get up and go to the lab, our seatbelts are buckled. And in addition to that, and I wanted to mention, and that is when I walk up and down the aisle, one of our requirements, of course, is we have to make sure everybody's seatbelt is buckled. We have to do that before we close the door and leave. pushback from the jet bridge or the ramp. And I see people and they have their seatbelt buckled, and 3 people could get in that seatbelt. I mean, not just them, but everybody else, because they just have nominally buckled it, but it's so loose that it's not going to help them. That so when I was reading some of the stories on this Hawaiian flight, I thought, I know exactly. I'm almost positive of what happened with those individuals. They had their seatbelt buckled, but that was so loose, it was not doing anything for them. So when they did encounter that small bump or big bump, they did, of course, fly out of their seat. And when that happens, you can slip down, you can slip out, all kinds of things can happen. And so when we ask you to buckle your seatbelt, we want it securely fastened around you. As we describe it, low and tight across your hips. And with what Eric said, this hydro flask, those things are heavy and they can be dangerous. Those are flying objects. I don't know if I mentioned this, but one time we were landing, I was forward and I'm sitting in my jump seat, and we landed and we're not to a screeching halt, but it was really kind of a very firm stop. And one of those hydro flasks got loose and was coming down the aisle at me. And it was a little scary. And I put my foot down on it right as almost it hit me and before a jump seat. So you have to hold on to that stuff because of the fact it's unexpected turbulence. So that's my little seatbelt lecture.
Yeah, it was really interesting because we had the questions like, well, why do we need to be strapped in if it's supposedly so, it really is one of those things where, we are, as much as we're prepared for it, and,
Right.
there are things that can happen that obviously you guys are trained in the back of the bus, and slurping your whatever tomato juice or whatever your beverage is, it can get pretty messy. So
and another armrest. You have to have, in order for us to go, the armrests have to be down in the aisle. And there's a reason. It's not that we're trying to be mean or nasty, that the armrests are a secondary protection against your flying in. You could be buckled in, but you could lean out and wind up across the aisle if the armrest isn't there. So everything, there's a really good reason for everything we say and do. There really isn't a reason.
Yeah. It kind of, and we took 2 flights, Toronto to Charlotte and Charlotte to Cancun, and they were really, for the most part, super uneventful. But it really is when you really start paying attention to how well everything has been, thought through over and over and over and over and improved upon. It's really fascinating. Eric, I got a question for you. Jim Duke is asking, will there be a chiming sound at 10,000 feet? Is that usually
Yes.
like
That's normal
where
with
we hear that ding?
the carriers, and Diane could expand upon that, but what we're doing is we're giving in general a signal to the flight attendants that it's okay for them to get up. And we do that at roughly 10,000 feet above the ground when we've exited lower mechanical turbulence, surface winds, that kind of thing. If it's smooth aloft and we believe we're going to be in smooth air, we give them a double ding, signaling that they can get up when they deem it appropriate. They have procedures for that too, but that's what we're signaling for the flight attendants for. Let the record show this might be the first question Jim Duke has ever asked me that I knew the answer to. One in a row.
Well, we are recording it. Yeah, I know it as my laptop or my iPad ding,
Right.
because I know that's when I can pull out my laptop or my iPad.
Right.
So
And we also there's also the flight deck is going to give us a double chime when we're descending and we're passing through 18,000 feet.
Yep.
Because those are the 2 chimes when we're coming out of sterile flight deck and then the chime when we're going into sterile flight deck, which means, and it doesn't mean anything to the passengers necessarily, but that means that unless it's a big time emergency, we no longer can just contact the flight deck. We can't, they're sterile. We don't talk to them because they're busy like landing the plane. So yeah. So there are reasons for that too.
Going up and
Okay.
coming on the descent. Yep.
Before we bring on Dawn, I do wanna ask that question that actually I'm really curious about, Eric, and that is the Peggy wrote. She said, I haven't flown in 15 years, but she flew from New York to Houston last month, and how she's basically wondering how come with all the advantages that must have happened in the last 15 years, how come that flight was about an hour longer than what she was used to about 10 years ago. So, and I mean, I have my own theories, but I would.
Well, I thought that was a great question. And if she hasn't flown for 15 years, the airplanes are still, the technology is different, but the speeds they're operating at is still about the same. And however, I think there's a lot more airplanes in the air now than there were 2 decades ago. Matter of fact, I'm sure of it. And so being sequenced on departure out of big city, sequenced to the line, being held down to climb, step climb, step climb, step climb to get up to the altitude, and then the same thing at arrival, going to reverse, being worked around, all the other traffic getting lined up for your airport and line the daisy chain. I'm sure it was much longer, a much longer ride than it was when there were far fewer airplanes in the air and you could just go to A and B. I remember asking my first officer one time, who was a young smart mouth and sort of reminded me of me, with hair. We were going into LA and we were working like we were on a simulator check ride, and I said, geez, am I just getting old, or is this a lot harder than it used to be? And Junior says, answer C is correct. Both A and B are true. It was much harder trying to jam all those airplanes into that space and do it at once than it was when there were a lot fewer of them there. It takes longer. It's harder.
Yeah. And the only other thing that I figured is that so because that to me seemed obvious that, you know, over the last 50 whatever years, a lot more planes are, you know, there. So you have to schedule that from one perspective. But then I was also thinking about what is actually the optimal flight speed to operate, you know, a plane, you know, at what speed? So part of me was like, well, could they have figured out that if they flew just that much slower, they save that much more fuel? I mean, I wouldn't put it past an airline just because I know that everything is being constantly evaluated and constantly being innovated and you know, so I wouldn't be super surprised if there was that element to it, that it's just more efficient.
Absolutely correct. It is more efficient, and as I mentioned with the turbulence incident, the airplanes are monitoring themselves and talking to the aircraft manufacturer and the company at the same time. And back years ago, Big Brother was not watching the pilots as much, and if they wanted to fly really fast, fine. Nobody would know it. They would just show up with less gas than the other guys all the time, but nobody was monitoring that and keeping statistical track of it. Whereas now, Speed Racer's name would be up on the chief pilot's desk going, hey, look, at Speed is 1,500 pounds over burn of all the other guys, every single leg, every single day he flies. So that all of this can be borne out, isolated, and shown right there that Speed is unable to control his lead foot, or chooses not to until he goes into the chief pilot's office and explains why he chooses not to. So there's the continuous monitoring has probably changed a lot of that.
Yeah. So that was just one thing that I thought that if there was anything that they could, be more efficient. But I will also say that arriving early in certain airports is not always an advantage, because then you sit and wait, and then you wait for a gate, and you go like.
Exactly.
So I think go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and that dovetails into passengers when they book tickets and they have a connection, and so on, when you book the ticket, it says you land somewhere at 7:15 in the evening, and your next flight is at 7:45 or even 8. That's nice, but I wouldn't do that on a bed, because you can land, and as you say, you could wait in the alley, you could be in the back of the plane, it could take you 10-15 minutes to get off the plane, you could be in an airport that has different terminals, and so it's important to be smart. And as I have said previously, it's better to be an hour early than 1 minute late, because trust me, if you're 1 minute late, they close the door and it doesn't open for anybody. And so you can say, but I can see the plane is right there. Well, that's the way it goes. So just as you said, Dieter and Eric, that just because you land early doesn't mean you're going to get off the plane early. It might mean that you get off the plane later than you thought you were going to. So
yeah. Well, this is a good time to bring in our guest, Don Calvert. Hey, Don.
Hey, Don.
Hey, everybody.
And Don, you, I mentioned in the introduction that you just recently completed a flight, I think from Washington to the Dominican, and for vacation, and then just recently came back. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, it's I've actually had a fairly active 3 weeks of flying. I've taken 6 flights. I took a flight in late November from Washington to Berlin, Germany. So across the ocean. Actually, it was to Frankfurt, Germany, and then Frankfurt to Berlin, and then another flight within Germany, Berlin to Dusseldorf, and then another transatlantic flight from Frankfurt back to Washington. So that was 4 flights, 2 over the ocean. And then just this past week, flew from Washington down to Punta Cana, Dominican Republic, and back. And I just wanted to say that I'm really proud to be part of this community. I mean, Eric, Dieter, Diana, and Ron, I mean, I am the most anxious of the anxious people. And I'm telling you, if I can do it, anybody watching can do it. And I mean that sincerely. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Yeah, I think the first question that I mentioned that even before we were going live, the first question is how, after completing the trip to Europe, and that was a work-related trip, I remember.
Yes.
How was it going into just a couple weeks later flying to the Dominican? So yeah, if you can share a little bit about how your mindset may have been affected by all these positive flights, and yeah.
Well, I will say this also. I'm going to answer that with being honest about having a history of sort of several anxiety disorders, and the way that my anxiety works is that I don't tend to remember. My primal brain is always operating as though I've never had a smooth flight. So I can come off of what I had was really 4 uneventful flights to Europe with all kinds of pressure work-wise. And unfortunately, I got COVID during the trip, but I supposedly did a great job with all of the bosses and blah, blah, blah. My mind, the way it works with a chronic anxiety disorder, and some of the people in this community maybe can relate, is that I went into those Caribbean flights with basically this feeling of absolute dread. And the rational part of my brain was saying, but wait a second, you know, you did a really outstanding job and you flew across the Atlantic Ocean. But I'm savvy enough to know that with these chronic kinds of anxieties, it usually doesn't remember the good flights. It's like I'm doing it all, starting it again. So I have to retrain myself really every single flight. And it happens as I do the flight.
And I'm not sure if you are aware of that, because I know that you've worked on your anxiety in other ways other than, you know, with Fearless Flight. But I can explain it very well from something that a lot more people can relate to, and that is when we were, you know, in high school, university, and we were studying for a test, right? And you're at home, you have your favorite music going, you're in an environment that's totally comfortable, and you go through your material, and you know, and then you got it, you know, like, oh yeah, that's super easy, I got it. But what you're not realizing is that, and I'm going to say this, that you're going outside of your comfort zone into what is almost like a hostile environment, right? Because now you walk into the school or the building, there's other people. If you're a sensitive person, you're picking up everybody else's anxiety. And then you sit down and you have a hard time, you know, remembering your name, so to speak, you know, and that is a very, very real thing. So that's why I wanted to ask you that question, because the answer to how am I going to really prepare is really that recurrent training that Ron and I, you know, have created with the Fearless Flyer Club, where you stay connected with that process. And just like Diane has recurrent training every so often in order to make sure that I'm going to say, Diane, maybe you can chime in. It's not so much, there's maybe some anxiety of whether you're going to pass or not, because it is your livelihood. But I think there's also a part of when you've gone through it, you have renewed your own confidence to any situation that can be thrown at you, right? Is that?
It's a very good description. Even flight attendants who have been doing this for years and years, much longer than I have, when you talk to them, most of them have a certain level of anxiety going into, because it's not just recurrent training, it's testing. I mean, we are tested on procedures, we're tested on equipment, we are given scenarios, and they say, okay, you're on this aircraft and this passenger is doing that, or this is an unprepared water evacuation. So you're given specific situations. You're paired up with another flight attendant, and you have to perform. And so there's certain things you have to say and do, and you have to do them, and then you're graded. Either you pass or you fail. And so there is, even if you've been doing this a long time, some anxiety. I will tell, this was the first time I went through it. And I will tell you that there's a part of me that actually looked forward to it. I was still anxious, but I wanted to show what I knew, because after flying for almost 4 years, I'm much more confident in what I know and how I perform. And so it's kind of push me, pull you sort of of an event over the course of a couple of days, which is rewarding as long as you pass.
Yes, as long as you pass. So, and I want to speak to that because we have Sharon. Sharon says she's very much you know, like you, Don, in the respect that all the prior positive flights kind of like they disappeared, you know, it's like they didn't even exist. And so the big thing is to actually start, you know, before your flight, even, you know, when if you're booking a week out, let's say, you know, and you start doing something every day. And if you were part of our last webinar, for anybody who's watching, which just was last Thursday, Ron took us through this really cool "Let's Go Fly" visualization, and it's such a cool meditation. It's about 38 minutes long, and it's in the Fearless Flight Club membership, and as an audio. So just listening to that once every day kind of gets you into this whole process of being at the gate, walking down the jetway, taking your seat, and all the different stages of your flight. So as you are listening to it and you're being reminded, right, to really use all of your senses to kind of make this real for you, you are literally retraining your nervous system. You're literally retraining how it's going to respond to all these unfamiliar sights and sounds and sensations, so that's one of the ways, right? That so watching scary turbulence videos is not the way to go, is what I'm trying to say here. We have to really allow ourselves to get to this place where, and it's funny, we think often in terms of tricking ourselves, but the reality is that when Diane and Eric and Ron walk down the jetway, you just heard Diane being really confident about, being in that role, serving, that the flight is going to be a great flight for everyone, So Diane is having a very different inner experience, not just mentally, but her emotional, I'm going to say her emotional composure is also very different. And by the way, like Diane is really a great example, because not every flight attendant may have the same kind of personal call to excellence, I will call it, and that will often kind of like shine through in the way somebody talks, somebody moves their body, and it's human nature, quite honestly, and that's something that's very hard to train. But don't be fooled, that person might just be perfect. If anything comes up, they might be just, dead on in everything that needs to happen in order to have a situation under control. So, but of course, as a fearful flyer, you always look to the flight attendant and it's like, what's she doing? Oh my God, she looks worried, when there's turbulence and stuff going on. And
we're
yet,
worried about our next meal. That's all we're worried about.
Yes, exactly. She's like, oh. So how were the flights? So anticipatory anxiety, is a real thing. And obviously, Dawn, for you, you're very aware of that. But how were then the actual flights themselves, and how were you able to maybe refocus or change your inner perspective to have a better experience? So
yeah, well, thank you for that, Dieter. First of all, the flights could not have been more different in reality than what my head was projecting. Really, the flight down to Dominican Republic, it was it's less than half of what my flight to Germany was. It was 3.5 hours. It was really quite uneventful.
Okay.
And it was very smooth, little bumps here, there. And it was true with the flight coming back. I was much more, for some reason, more anxious coming back to Washington. And that may have to do with, coming back to work and other things. But I would say, how did I deal? ART, A-R-T. One is, to me, it's really important that anybody who's has anxiety, you have to accept and don't try to get rid of being an anxious person. If you think that if you're going to wait till you're going to be completely relaxed and flying, sure, you're going to be waiting for a long, long time. So I want to just say is you cannot wait. You have to do things that are meaningful while you are anxious. You have to accept, and then you do these things because that's what is meaningful. That's a values-based life. I deserve that vacation. I was going to do it whether I was anxious or not. And it was really that simple. So that adds the A part, the acceptance. The R is to refocus. So R is when I'm on that flight through the tools that this group has given me. And it can be second by second. I can refocus on the physicality. First of all, I'm always strapped in, as Diana and Dieter and my friend Eric has said, and Ron, you're strapped in, but you're strapped in tightly whenever you're in that flight. But then you can just, even if it's just for a moment, I'm going to just take a look at that magazine. That's in the thing. I'll listen to some relaxation. Those count, even if it's just a moment. You refocus. What I do now is I often text friends like Ron or Eric or Diana or Dieter or other people, and I just basically normalize the experience by checking my email. So I'm refocused. So first is accept. Second R is refocus. And then importantly, T, which is the technology, which I think Eric and Diana, you all are just so, gifted in. And I'm a gadget person. So I have just bought, I'm not lying, I am the most unlikely Microsoft flight simulator guy. I have gotten Microsoft Flight Simulator, and I.
Now we know what Eric wants for Christmas.
Yeah, they're all sold out, Eric. I'm sorry, man. I got the last ones. But it's very interesting. 2 hours ago, I was actually on my TV learning how to fly. I wasn't doing it very well. I was flying a small plane. But I think one of the things I'm drawn to this is that there's really a lot of technology that goes into making this such a really incredibly safe, unbelievably safe form of transportation. And I think Eric, you've done such a really wonderful job of instilling this with me personally, is when you start really getting that, you start to lose this sense of, oh, I'm in this real fragile machine. Those are not fragile machines. They're very powerful machines. And so again, A is accept. If you're anxious, go and do the flight anyway. It's what you deserve, what you want. R, refocus on the teachings, what we talked about here. In T, you have to get to know the technology because it's really, really powerful.
So accept, refocus, and technology.
Technology.
And I would just, I'm gonna say that T can be accept, refocus, and trust, right?
Yes,
because,
absolutely.
Yeah, so that's awesome. Yeah,
very
really
good.
love that.
Very nice, Don.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. I do want to ask Sean's question for you, Eric. So Sean has a burning question for you.
Okay.
How windy does it have to be for airports to cancel departing flights? I have a flight out of St. Louis scheduled for Friday, where 20 to 30-mile-hour winds with 40-mile gusts are currently forecasted. If we are a go, what can I expect with those crazy crosswinds? Hopefully not a roller coaster ride. So I'm gonna just let you answer it, and then I have a pretty good one at the end too. So go ahead, Eric.
Generally, most, and I can't believe this popped back into my head because I don't review it on a regular basis now. But when you said that, boing, the answer just flew in there. Most, at least the single aisle airplanes, wind limitations are 29 steady with gusts not above 35. 29 gusts 35, bang, and the airplane can handle much more than that, and so can the pilots. And when we're quote unquote have passed our check rides, having fun in the simulators, the guy will go, hey, let's jack this up to 50 and just see if you can keep it. Just see if you can keep it on the paint, and it's real. And you can. And sometimes you blow tires doing it, hold it in the straight line to stop the yaw. You can do it. It's incredible. They'll put the visual up so you actually see what's happening, and the airplane nose is pointing at the terminal of the North Pole, and the runway's that way when you're starting the lineup. And it's doable. But because of sanity issues and tires, you don't, which costs money. You don't do that. And generally, if it's in excess of 29 gust 35, the airliners won't want to arrive or depart then, and the airport authority knows it. So if they're going to have sustained winds above that, then they just stop it to prevent the insanity and wait for it to come down, since nobody wants to participate anyway. That being, if there's, a big airport like St. Louis, there's no physical constraints on a short runway, not a mountain right in front of it, or you have other things going on. But if you just have airport X that's benign like that, that's generally the wind limit above which, below which you fly and above which you do not. And if it's below that, just below that, and what can he expect for bumps? He can expect bumps with what we call mechanical turbulence, with the wind flowing that fast across the surface. That will be like a class 5 rapid, and until the airplane climbs up in a few thousand feet out of that, it's even airborne going to get moved around quite a bit until it climbs out of ways.
Thanks for that, because I was always wondering, and that's one of those things. And you mentioned Düsseldorf, Don, so that's what reminded me. There's some crazy crosswinds, and I've gone to Düsseldorf myself a few times, and the plane, it's weird when you as a passenger kind of like actually see the runway as you because the planes and Düsseldorf is well known for that, for the crosswinds, and I remember, I think one time we actually had to come around, I think 3 times before we actually touched down. And yeah, I mean, for me, it was really, I'm gonna say, it was something exciting. I wasn't particularly scared or anything, but you do realize that the planes are incredible. And I want to come back to that, Don. You wouldn't be the first person that has come through Fearless Flight who is here for flyer at the start, who all aircraft pilot. The last person, do you remember, Eric, what was the lady's name on Thursday on our webinar? Susan, wasn't it?
Yes.
Susan.
Yes,
Runyon?
she was.
She was the girl who had that crazy flight in Kansas. Remember?
Yeah.
Anyway, I won't go into that flight, but basically she said that she is going to get flying lessons. And Jim Morris is another fearful flyer who's got flying lessons. It's I think I just lost everything.
We can hear you, Brett.
We can hear you fine, and it had been kind of stuttering a little bit, kind of like an older Bruce Lee movie where you just had a little bit of delay with the lip syncing, but now you appear to be frozen.
Yeah, your face is frozen.
But the transmission's okay.
Yeah.
The voice.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Well.
Eric's the host.
No.
I was going to ask Eric. To address talking about particularly the winds, crosswinds when we land, to explain to the passengers, to everybody out there, that what we know, and that is sometimes our landing is, shall we say, firm, because you guys and gals up there in the front want to get the plane down. Can you just for just a moment or two address that issue?
You can often still get a really good smooth crosswind landing, but because it's gusty and your correction for the crosswind is changing continuously, when you get very close to the ground and you have it lined up perfectly, what we call a slip, where we drop the wing into the wind a little bit and use opposite rudder so the nose is lined up with the runway, because at some point you have to have it mostly not lined up with the runway. So when you've done that, when you have that perfect slip and it's set up, that's a good time to give up trying to get the perfect landing to impress the other guy, because you have the correction perfectly and the longitudinal control perfect. It's good to transition from air to ground right there, number one. And number two, once you're on, you don't want to bounce up. You don't want to bounce up or be back in the air with less airspeed trying to correct for the same wind. So once you're on, you want to stick it and let the ground spoilers and speed brakes do their thing and keep you pinned to the runway to decelerate. So often those hurt a little more than a regular one, but it hurts the pilot's ego more than it hurts your bottom when you got to do that. Yeah.
You were talking about Kansas. That's where I'm going to be on Christmas Eve. I know we're coming to the end of the show.
Oh, really?
I
Great.
start a 4-day trip. I got Thanksgiving off, but I'm flying Christmas, and right now I may be flying New Year's Eve as well. But yeah, so I'll be Friday night. I'll be in Oklahoma City. Christmas Eve I'll be in Garden City, Kansas, and then we go back and forth somewhere I don't remember. And then
That's really far east for you, isn't it?
Actually, because our flying has changed over the last year with regard to the numbers of trips, we in Phoenix are flying a lot through Dallas. And so from Dallas, we're going way east. I've been to Alabama and Kansas and Green Bay and all the way up to the Dakotas and back east to Indiana and stuff. So yeah, so we've been going a lot more east. Anyway, so if you're flying, for all of those out there listening, if you're flying over Christmas Day is actually a pretty good day to fly. It's usually not as busy as far as the numbers of seats in the aircraft. But of course, leading up to that, it gets busy. But if you're flying over Christmas, have great sympathy for your flight attendants and your pilots. We're all away from our loved ones. And we appreciate candy. We appreciate candy. Just saying, or something anyway, but yeah.
Well, thank you, Diane, for that shout out.
We're shameless. We're shameless. I understand, but that's what I am. So
we love that about you. I just realized I'm maybe not paying Elon enough for the Starlink because I disappeared there for a second.
Yes.
But I also want to say, Jim Duke, thank you, because Jim says, well, bring them snacks and Starbucks gift cards. So Jim knows. And so Don, the last question for you is, do you have any flights coming up? Do you have any lined up, or is it, yeah.
Yeah, in fact,
when are you gonna fly next?
It's funny you mentioned that, Dieter. First of all, I would be lucky if I ever got. I really, really love connecting with the flight staff. I've never met anybody as classy as Diana and one of these planes. I'd be lucky, but world class, and they really love it when you connect with them. They really, because that helps me, and I think it helps them because I'm telling them they're awesome because they are. I've kind of made it a goal. I want to fly every month somewhere. So in 2023, it'd be great to fly somewhere 12 times. I see at least 1 or 2 trips to Europe for work. I would like to go to maybe Paris, maybe for vacation. I definitely want to get out to Phoenix and see some friends here who I've got to buy a nice big dinner for. And maybe, I've even thought about going to Denver and maybe taking up skiing again, but I think that the skiing part's going to be that I have to be careful because I'm really not an athlete anymore. I never was, but I really want to get out and start pushing the envelope. I'd like to get to Chicago, eventually get over to Asia, and maybe Australia down the road. So awesome. There's a lot.
Great.
That is very cool. And you are totally on the right track in yeah, Jin says you need to fly to Toronto. Yes. And we can have dinner in Toronto.
I might be visiting all of you if I don't have a hotel room. Maybe you can. No, I'm just
there you go. But you are on the right track, and that is, you know, you have a plan, you have a goal, and you have a plan to achieve it, and that whatever that is for somebody, and it doesn't have to be as ambitious or as great or, you know, as you had laid out for yourself. But it is important to have a vision and a goal, and to have actually also steps that lead to the accomplishing of that goal or vision, and that recurrence, you know, it's like that practice and that training. So that's really awesome.
If I can add to that, Dieter, I think importantly, I really want to commit to joining the monthly, you know, the group, the paid membership, because I think that to me is going to not only help me when I'm flying, those skills will help me outside of that, because most of us have these anxiety issues in our daily lives. And I think that's what I'm appreciative of what you're offering.
Yeah, and thank you for saying that, because, you know, the truth is in those monthly group coaching webinars, we don't talk so much about, you know, what we talk tonight. We really go much deeper into basically that funny saying that I always love when Ron says it. It's like the pain in your brain is not about the plane, you know, and that is you know, the monthly group coaching is really a safe space. We always have, you know, really manageable group size, so everybody gets to participate and really get in there. And I think last Thursday, how did you experience that, Eric? Because you were on Thursday as well. So how's that for you?
You broke up right at the salient part of that question. I don't. What did you ask me? And I was paying attention.
Well, you were on Thursday. So how was that for you? You know, compared to, let's say, you know, our weekly live shows. Like, how would you describe the difference?
That's a completely different presentation. That was very neat. We hit a couple of prepared subjects, and like you said, walk through with that meditation. And Ron's very good at that, and I'm attempting to pay attention, and within 3 minutes I'm like
works like a charm.
He goes, we're getting where we're going. To go, I better wake up. Yeah, it was just like a real flight for me. So but a very sonorous, even voice, and until we got to the end, he goes, and I'm like, huh? Oh yeah, I missed the whole flight again. But it was really, I had heard him do that one before, and that was pretty neat. That was a neat presentation. Yeah. I think everybody liked it. We didn't have a huge group, but we took a few specific questions, but most of them was guiding everybody through that, what we would have called in simulation a loft, a line-oriented flight training, and that was just a whole walkthrough on a flight. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I found it super cool too, just to participate and be in it, and because it's tailored to a smaller group, right? We're really bringing in what everybody wants to, you know, have resolved for themselves. So, well, holy, it's we went a little over today.
Oh, you think?
Well, anyway. I guess we should tell everybody where Captain Ron actually is. So where in the world is Ron? He is right now on a flight over to Europe, Denmark more specifically, and he's gonna spend the next 10 days with Mai, a fearful flyer, and she's gonna help him track down a couple of distant relatives, and so hope there. And I think he plans to be on next week. So we're gonna talk about whether or not he's gonna be able and willing to get up at 4 in the morning.
We should be betting.
But either way,
We should be betting
Yeah.
cocktails on whether or not we'll see him next week and whether he can suck it up or not after a week over there. If he'll be acclimated, but it'll still be 4 in the morning.
Still, but yeah.
that is very true. That is very true. Well, either way, whether you celebrate Christmas or Hanukkah or not at all, and you just have happy holidays, where I wish you, all of you, super wonderful Christmas time with family and hopefully loved ones. And same to you, Diane and Eric and Don. I hope that you guys have great holidays.
Thank you. You too, Dieter.
Thank you.
Yeah, I hope that next week we'll all be back here. And
At least 3 of us.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I think at least 3 of which 3 we don't know yet.
We pulling people in off the street. There'll be
That's right.
somebody's. We'll figure it out.
That's right. All right. So thank you for watching. Tune in next week again, 6:30 Pacific. And yeah,